The stars remember what we sign. I was 500 meters inside the throat of a dead ring when the hum found my teeth. We'd threaded the survey tender through jagged ribs of glassed carbon, past murals of ash where cities once looked inward at their sun. The locals called this ruin the Dyson Choir. To our little crew, it was a courthouse waiting for a judge who overslept. I was Commander Mara Elian, ex-Navy audit captain turned Commonwealth Field steward, and my orders were a ledger more than a leash. Somewhere inside this cathedral of wreckage slept a relic saintship or archive. The rumor argued that chose masters by law, not by blood. The air in my helmet tasted of copper where the condenser's gasket needed love. Through the faceplate, dust flurries spun in our headlamps, making the void look like winter. Tamsin on navigation kept whispering ranges. A metronome I trusted more than my pulse. 80 meters to marked seam. 40. 30. Mind the flexor strut. Port side. Our engineer, Ortega, bumped a thruster, and our tender slid under a skeletal beam with millimeters to spare. If I looked down, I could see the black curve of the anchorage yawning obsidian anchorage, the ring's still warm harbor where 1,000 ship kilns once sang parts into being. Now it murmured like a sleeping choir with a throat full of broken music. A glyph winked on my wrist slate. Faint enough, I thought it a ghost pixel. Then it pulsed once, like a second heartbeat. It wasn't our code. It wasn't anyone's code. Not anymore. Do you see that Hale asked, voice soft because even diplomats know when a cathedral listens. It sees us, I said. And the words fogged my visor in a tiny crescent. The tender's hull thrummed as if something distant walked the ring's bones. I'd been told artifacts could itch your jaw before they showed your eyes anything. That hum fit the graduates' tales. We drifted closer to the seam. A black zipper in a black coat. Vulture Guild has 3 hulls loitering outside the debris cone, Hale murmured. Their transponder ethics remain hypothetical. Consider them a weather pattern, as I said. We sail under law. Powerline, we don't outrun storms. We write their boundaries. The seam answered our lights by absorbing them. There was a sonar quality to the darkness, a hollow that returned meaning instead of echo. Ortega cut thrusters. We floated on faith and the ring's soft tide. When the seam parted, it didn't open like a door, but like a book, unbinding along a spine that had waited longer than our species had laws. The chamber beyond was not empty. It had been designed as a vault for pressure and doctrine. Curved ribs converged toward a dais where something large lay asleep beneath layers of translucent, ambered film. The film was brittle along fracture lines. The thing beneath was not. I knew it before my training caught up a ship's brain case shaped like a votive. Not a brain, an oath. A saintship's nucleus. Readings, I asked, and heard the paper dryness of my voice. Metals old as our flag, Ortega said. No reactive signature. But the hum. It's climbing. Hale's breath made a click in comms. If it is a saintship, Commander, the rights. I know the rights, I said, though I'd never believed I'd use them. My grandmother had told me bedtime stories from treaty law, old as tide charts and sharper than arrows. Saintships chose stewards by instruction, not inheritance. You taught to be tested. You demonstrated understanding of covenant. If you tried to pry, the door stayed stone. We anchored 4 tether pins into the dais perimeter and set up a small frame of light. I held up my glove, and Ortega fed me the first slate the text burned into my muscles by academy repetition. I did not pray. I taught by numbers. We behave. I recited by counts. We bind. I present Ledger 1. The right of passage. 2. The duty to report loss. 3. The limit on reclaim that protects the weak. 4. The mirror that returns force to its author. 5. The peace that follows. I teach these to the air. If the air learns, let it speak. Nothing happened. I switched to the next lesson. I diagrammed a simple convoy dispute and walked the invisible student through the judgment. I asked questions the way my best instructors had asked me, leaving space for answers. I described a pirate tithe and how the doctrine measured restitution without blood. I taught the law as if the law were a child who deserved kindness. The hum deepened until I felt it in my molars, like the sweet ache before rain. The amber film crackled along a seam, and a thin sheet flaked away. Hale's hand tightened on my shoulder, not fear, but relief doing its oldest trick. Powerline, you don't wake saints by shouting, you wake them by showing your homework. Wind in space is nonsense. But the chamber exhaled. Our lights shifted tone, as if subtracting a spectrum only the artifact no longer needed. A voice entered our comms without carrier parasites or static. Lesson accepted. It said, simple as a ledger's first line. Identify steward. My name could have been an answer. My rank could have been a key. But the law had stricter mirrors than pride. Stewardship is provisional, I said, never singular. Recognize me as representative of Commonwealth Custody Adjudication. Hold number CW119. Theta. Associate my officers by my badge. Invite the local to hear. Noted. The voice said. Local must hear. Hale swallowed a laugh, the way someone swallows rain when it finally arrives. It demands a gallery. Commander. We'll give it 1. I said, open your channels. Outside, the Vulture Guild had crept closer under the pretense of mere curiosity. Their patched corvettes wore paint like bruises, each panel a different history of theft. Their leader, Sten Var, was the kind of man who thought loopholes should be cut with a torch. He spoke for transmission, oily and delighted. Commonwealth tender. We see an unauthorized salvage intrusion. This is not salvage, Hale replied. His tone polished granite. This is stewardship. Same net, different bait. Sten said, we'll board and supervise your honesty. Powerline predators love paperwork they forge themselves. Around the ring, civilian beacons flared as miners, haulers, and homesteaders tuned ears. The choir had its parish, and the parish was hungry for order that wasn't theft. A woman on a Rock Harrow skiff sent a 2-line message that stung more than a speech. My girl sleeps under a wall panel so thin I can hear vacuum laugh. Please make this right. I glanced at Tamsin. How long until the guild tries a push? They have a boarding spine warmed, but they're waiting for a reason they can misquote. Let's deny them quotation, Hale said. Invite them as witnesses under Clause 3. I nodded. Artifact. I said, summon a hearing. Presence required. The voice said, teach intent, except public. We transmitted the summons in old formats and new, trilingual on the big bands and whispered on the miners' private snow channels. Sten Var responded by yawning his Corvette's spine toward us like a wasp's sting. I could see the weld slag along its ribs, proud of its ugliness. Commander, Ortega said, you'll want to hear this. The ring is routing power. I'm reading microscopic heat in the Saint ship's frame, but it's not drawing, it's balancing, like a ledger. Keep watching, I said. It will teach us the bill. The chamber's floor projected a plane of light that had weight without mass. Symbols scrolled in increments rather than waves, each step a counted thing. A courtroom without rails grew from the glow. Not a place for spectacle. A place for totals. The voice spoke again. Nearer and somehow older. State petition. Petition recognize Obsidian Anchorage and adjacent Dyson Choir segments as protected heritage and public utility. I said. Establish a lawful corridor for traffic. Set restitution rates for unauthorized tithe extraction. And appoint provisional stewards to maintain the ledger and mirror. Stenvar transmitted laughter like thrown bones. You think your museum trick can tell a guild how to eat? We're not prohibiting appetite, Hale said. We're prohibiting theft. Powerline hunger is an argument until it becomes a weapon. A miner's child sent a pictogram, a hand holding a tiny ship like a toy under a larger hand's shadow. I didn't save it. I didn't need to. The image engraved itself where adrenaline carves memory. Teach proofs, the Saint Ship said. I taught. I laid out cases from the Belt Famine and the Triple Passage Strike, where doctrine had limited force so children lived. I did the numbers, not the poetry. I set variables, swapped inputs, traced outcomes. I didn't say mercy because the equations showed it. Tamsin added vectors for convoy spacing. Ortega added heat budgets and thrust penalties. Hale spoke in the cool voice of a clerk at the end of a long day, performing fairness as an art no one notices until it goes missing. The guild tried to interrupt with a flare of EM noise, raw and loud as a bar fight. The Saint Ship didn't blink. The chamber's light simply added a line to the ledger, attempted disruption. Noted. Return in mirror if repeated. Stenvar stopped trying to outshout math. He went for the simpler trick. Boarding spine away, Tamsin said. They're coming. Artifact, I said. First lawful act. Mirror force to authors. The voice said. Within counts. Within counts. I agreed. The boarding spine extended like a blind finger toward our tender's hatch. It carried charges that chewed bolts and spat heat into locks. I'd seen such mouths open, people. I kept my breath slow. Ortega spooled decoys and dumped a thin film of reflective chaff in a cloud that looked like snow. Tamsin drifted us 3 degrees off the obvious. Hale kept talking on the public channel, explaining Clause 3 as if conversation were armor. The Saint Ship did not fire. It balanced. A ripple spread along the ring's interior. A thermal tide. The spine's own heat signature inverted as if it had been placed in an accountant's hand and counted backward. The charge's timers acquired a delay equal to the time they'd be on our hull, then added a penalty equal to the unauthorized tithe they represented. Sten's own data core received a ledger entry with numbers that hurt to look at because they were fairer than any fiction. Powerline, if you can't stop a knife, make it read its own receipt. The spine retracted a meter in confusion, then snapped with a sudden, neat pop. Not an explosion. A return. The charges cooked off in the spine's mouth with the same energy they reserved for us, minus the lawful corridor's protected margin. The guild corvette bucked like a kick dog. No one died. The doctrine made certain. But I heard Sten swear in a language that bled. You did this, he growled. The mirror did. Hale said, we only counted. Civilians sent a low flood of message pips. Many just a single symbol, a circle drawn around a small ship. Protection. The Saint Ship repeated the glyph on our walls like a teacher encouraging a class that had finally shown its work. Sten pivoted to the second oldest plan redefined terms until theft smells like tribute. Commonwealth has no standing here, he hissed. We do. We keep the lanes safe for a tithe that barely buys fuel. Then you are a public contractor, I said. Present your ledgers. Silence is honest in the way most speeches aren't. His silence proved our need. Artifact cusses, I said. Confirm hearing scope, establish corridor. Initial restitution rate for unauthorized tithe extraction over 5 cycles. And provisional appointment of stewards, revocable by public tally. Scope confirmed, the voice said. Appoint stewards. Hale looked at me the way you look at a cliff before you jump into cold water. Commander. I appoint Commonwealth Field Custody as primary steward and the Anchorage Assembly as co-stewards. I said, we will teach the numbers and keep the mirror. Powerline stewardship is a promise you pay for every day. We lost the next hour to proofs and cross-questions. The saintship required we demonstrate not only doctrine but process, notice periods, appeal steps, temperature tolerances, fuel tables for small-haul tugs on poor propellant. We built a corridor the way you build a bridge from both ends, painfully, with bolts you can name. Civilians spoke in small lines I tried to store like coins. A brittle-voiced gardener described how her algae tubes died every time guild drones skimmed her sunlight. A ferryman confessed he'd skim too, because hunger built its own ethics. A pair of twins, voices overlapping, asked if the mirror would work on words. Hale answered that one. Words belong to people, he said. The mirror helps them return to mouths they were stolen from. The saintship's light flickered along the ambered frame as if breath were leaving a body that never needed lungs. Ledger ready. It announced. Mirror standing. Corridor drawn. Transmit, I said. Throat tight. It transmitted without fanfare a corridor map with speed limits, heat caps, and vector windows, a restitution schedule scaled to ship mass, a sanction ladder that escalated by degree without ever salivating for blood. The Vulture Guild's accounts received the opening bill for 5 cycles of predation, not an annihilation, not a martyr maker, a cost. Stenvar went very quiet, then very cold. You think this ends us? He said. It only teaches us new angles. Good, I said. Learn. Powerline, if your method fears sunlight, it isn't a method. It's mold. The first retaliation came disguised as compliance. The guild broadcasted a public acceptance of the corridor, then detoured through a mined segment just outside the boundary to force a traffic knot. 3 small family ships bunched, then pancaked against an eddy of micro-debris they wouldn't have met if lanes were clear. No hulls cracked. Fear cracked instead. The saintship noted the breach and mirrored a penalty that froze 1/3 of the guild fuel for 48 hours. The second retaliation wasn't disguised at all. A rumor storm lit the bands the Ash Monk stationaries who worship ruin and fear awakening were coming in relic scrub robes that smelled like burnt paper. They were not a unified cult, just a habit of thought with a wardrobe and knives. But they could mob a corridor into panic. Their method had nothing to sell except paralysis. I took our tender to the public dock while Hale and Tamsin set up the corridor beacons like runway lights for frightened eyes. Ortega stayed inside with the Saint ship, learning its hum like a mechanic learns a heartbeat. On the dock, the air smelled like old metal, cooled too quickly that penny tang with a memory of steam. People came with their questions and their offerings. A boy pressed a torn ribbon into my glove and asked if the ship liked gifts. I told him it liked lessons. He nodded like he'd suspected. The Ash Monks arrived in a slow wave of shoes and slogans. They carried placards with elegant calligraphy that said nothing in many words. Their leader, a tall person with a voice tuned to sound like prophecy, spoke as if the air owed them rent. Wake nothing, they intoned. Sleep cures all. Sleep cures hunger, a woman asked, fierce and tired. Hope is a predator, the leader said. and awakenings feed it. Hale stepped forward with his calm like a coat he shared. We're not resurrecting a weapon. We're recognizing a court. Powerline, fear loves to call any mirror a monster. A bottle flew. Then a second. Then the knocking panic of feet trying to be louder than their owners' hearts. Tamsin kicked on the corridor beacons, and they pulsed a simple rhythm. 1, 2. Pause. 1, 2. Pause. Sanctuary. The saint ship repeated the pulse in our bones. The ash monk's noise forgot its place. Ortega, I whispered. Your status. Learning the temper, they said. It's like balancing a kettle. Don't let the whistle own the room. The ship wants numbers. It remembers by ledger. It keeps its kindness in counts. Say that again. I said, and I didn't know why the repetition mattered until after. It teaches by numbers, Ortega said, patient in the way only an engineer with love speaks. And it remembers by ledgers, never by collars. Powerline, some ships wear crowns, the worthy ones keep books. Sten Var used the confusion as cover. His second corvette slipped along the ring's shadow to a position that let him take a shot not at us, but at the first beacon in the chain. He didn't have to shatter it. He only had to tilt it a degree and call it a misalignment. A corridor without true north is a corridor people don't trust. Beacon drift, Tamsin said, eyes tight. I can nudge, but the guild can nudge harder. Mirror, I asked. The saint ship answered by lowering the mirror, not raising it. A line added itself to the ledger. We do not return force where teaching will suffice. Then it pulsed a code into the beacon that anyone could read and open. Simple checksum that a child could verify with a kitchen calculator. The beacon began singing its math. The ash monks listened despite themselves. The rumor storm found a rock to break on. Make them show their work. Hale murmured. Always, I said. We spent a long night turning a panicked crowd into a public and a hostile guild into a debtor with options. We posted the ledger in common places, a 2-meter slab of plain text scroll on the dock's blank wall, and a glowing strip across the ring's shadowed interior where any ship could see their obligations by mass and vector. People touched the list like it was warm. The cost arrived a day later, disguised as logic. Sten Var filed a petition, crisp as a cut, arguing that the Commonwealth stewardship was colonial overreach. He quoted our own doctrine back at us with small edits that turned mirrors into blinds. He appealed for an independent arbiter drawn from local interests. Hale handed me the document and looked, for once, tired. He's not entirely wrong, he said. We did appoint ourselves first. Then we yield first, I said. Artifact. Convened selection by tally. Public. Transparent. Accepted, the saint ship said. Candidates. We posted the call where children could read it and minors could laugh at it honestly. Names went up that made sense, and names went up that were jokes. Because jokes are how communities test their gag reflex. In the end, the assembly chose 3 stewards myself as the Commonwealth's hand, with my power cut by the circle, a minor named Deka with knuckles like knotted rope, and a teacher called Menu who kept a chalk stub behind his ear in case numbers wanted company. Sten Var tried to sneak in a proxy wearing citizenship like a scarf. The tally saw through the scarf. Powerline. If you want the public's trust, ask it to choose your leash. The saint ship required oaths with clauses you could put on a lunchbox. We signed. The room smelled like old ink, though no ink lived there. Tamsin grinned at me through the glass like I'd just agreed to parenthood. Maybe I had. Our first week as stewards, we learned the weight of screws. A corridor isn't a line on a map. Its bearings changed by hands that tremble before they steady. We redistributed guild fuel penalties into a public reserve that paid for beacon maintenance and emergency tug pulls. Menno taught a late class at the dock where he'd give any pilot a cup of tea and a problem set. Deka organized an unromantic cruise whose job was to check bolts and file reports. Because heroism gets headlines, but hugs don't keep rails from shearing. The guild adapted. They hired local captains in thin partnerships so they could claim co-ownership and harvest the corridor's goodwill. They filed minor suits that clogged processes, the way gravel clogs a pump. They staged a collision with their own drone, then screamed assault. The Saint ship logged every attempt in the ledger in a tone that made Fury feel silly. We countered each with a teachable fix. Still, cost accumulates in skin, not just ink. Our first tangible cost came when a micrometeor swarm we mispredicted sandblasted a beacon chain. Tamsin took shrapnel through her sleeve as she anchored a new line. The shards slipped under her skin like mean snow. She stayed conscious by reciting vector sums as the medic worked. I gripped her ankle and recited with her, because pain respects company. Powerline, we trade blood for better math, but we count the trade. The second cost arrived as heat. The Saint ship. Balancing mirrors and ledgers. Kept a tight grip on temperature budgets to avoid escalation. During an enforcement action against a thick-hulled smuggler, we ran our tender's radiator lines close to red. Ortega shut down everything that wasn't breath and balance, but the heat margin we lost wouldn't be back soon. The tender would live slower for a month. Patience is a cost in a battle that likes speed. Halfway through that month, the real test woke. Ash monks aren't a monolith, but some branches braid themselves into the worst ropes. One cell infiltrated the anchorage assembly by wearing grief-like armor and hope like a stain. They crafted emotion with perfect ceremony and rotten heart, a vote to pause the corridor for a week to let tempers cool. In that pause, 1,000 small predations would masquerade as accidents. The vote needed 2 hands to lift. Mine had weight, but I'd promised to let the public stir the pot that cooked them. Hale whispered that we could win the numbers clean. Menno worried how many would be frightened by the monk's theater. Deka punched her fist into her palm and said something that could bend metal. I asked the Saint ship to advise. It did not instruct. It showed a ledger with 2 paths, both ended with a cost. One path had arguing. The other had grieving. Powerline law can't promise victory. It can only promise we won't become our enemies. We went to the vote under the open bands, with the corridor beacons pulsing the little heartbeat they'd adopted by accident. Sten Var stood outside the hall with his smile made of polished knives. The ash monks filled the back rows and hummed a note that pretended to be holy. We did not posture. We explained. We asked questions and waited for answers. The Saint ship projected cases on the wall in numbers anyone could chase. Children held chalk and drew lines under each step when they understood, adding short tick marks that looked like a ladder up a cliff. The vote went our way, not because we were brave, but because transparency tasted like clean water. The pause failed. The corridor kept beating. The ash monk's hum faltered, then dwindled to a note that sounded like apology, but was probably hunger. 2 days after, a different knock sounded in the ring's bones. Not guild, not monks. A legalist caravan. Their hulls were clean. Their documentation was cleaner. The Sovereign Exchange, a compact of merchants with lawyers for captains, had arrived to audit our audit. They feared precedent more than pirates. Hale met their envoy on the dock where the light fell in bands like a blind's shadow. The envoy, Sarah Yarrow, wore a suit that cost more than most houses, but stood with feet a little apart, ready to run if numbers turned ugly. We recognize corridor authority pending review, she said. We contest mirror powers applied to non-belligerents. You believe your contracts should outrank public safety, Hale said. Not unkind. We believe contracts keep safety honest, Yarrow replied. Powerline. When law meets law, the winner is the ledger everyone can read. I didn't despise them. Pirates steal with knives. Legalists steal with definitions. But sometimes, legalists also save us by trimming our excess pride. We invited them into the Saint Ship's chamber and let the room do the dressing down. The voice spoke with a patience I wanted to steal. Teach us your contracts, it said. We will add them to our counts. Yarrow did not gloat. She taught. She showed penalty clauses that punished weather, not negligence. She showed indemnities that ate victims first. We crossed out the rot together. We added a line that made Ortega clap like a child, heat budgets encoded as obligations tied to freight class. So a courier couldn't pretend a furnace was a feather. Yarrow adjusted a clause and looked almost shy. We've never had a judge who listened, she said. You do now. I told her. And it wants homework turned in on time. We signed a compact public, plain spoken, enforceable by mirror and by tally. The caravan left with their hulls unscarred and their pride tempered. Sten Var watched them go, like a man watching a tide he didn't predict. The ash monks scratched symbols on the dock that rain would erase. Menno brought me a cup of tea that tasted like burned sugar and forgiveness. You're shifting, he said. I'm not sure from what to what, I admitted. From doubt to stewardship, he said. As if that were a direction on a map. And your shadow does not frighten the children. Powerline authority is only holy if it kneels to the ledger. That evening, I walked the ring's interior track alone, letting the weak gravity make my bones remember childhood. The light there was dim and kind. The Saint Ship's glyph traced itself along the curve, a line that meant corridor and a circle that meant promise. I put my gloved hand to the glass and felt a little warmth that wasn't physics. A message pinged my slate. Tamsin, terse even when amused. There's a quirk in the mirror. Not a fault. A choice. Might be worth your eyes. In the chamber, Ortega had removed another sheet of fragile amber with tweezers a jeweler would envy. Underneath, etched into the frame, lay a sequence of marks too regular to be art and too beautiful to be mere math. Numbers, ledger entries from ages before we mapped our current sky. They were a song with a beat only obligation hears. It's remembering us as we teach it, Ortega said. Not our faces, our sums. This is the lore. Then, Hale murmured, standing as if in a library. It teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. I traced one mark with my eye and made a promise I didn't speak. We would leave our work on this metal in a way a scavenger couldn't peel off for trophy. The ship would carry our choices forward like a gravity that doesn't let stones fly apart. Powerline memory without mercy turns to ice. Mercy without memory turns to mud. A storm bloomed at the edge of our maps. Not weather. A fleet. Sten Var had begged larger wolves to dine on our porch. His debt buyers came in cold hulls with hot engines and the kind of guns merchants keep under blankets. The Sovereign Exchange pinged that they could mediate. But their neutrality had limits as thin as our air. The ash monks whispered that this was the universe punishing pride. The miners sharpened tools that weren't weapons and cried quietly because fear must be metabolized somewhere. We could run, we could entrench, and hope the mirror held against scale. We could ask the saint ship to grow fangs and become what the monks feared. I gathered the stewards in the chamber, the light sifting across our faces like the inside of a seashell. We listened to the enemy's engines creak as they cooled into firing positions. "We keep the corridor open," I said. "We don't show teeth first. We make a gambit they don't know how to price." Beitika asked. "Better." I said, "A ledger." Hale's eyes sparked. That dangerous kind of glad lawyers get when justice and spectacle are momentarily the same animal. A public audit. Of what, Tamsin asked, bruised but grinning because she smelled a stunt. Of their contracts with Sten Var. I said, "Artifact, can you request covenant chains for debts tied to predation within this ring?" "Yes," the saint ship said. "Within counts." "Then pull them." I said, "Publish the chain and mirror the obligations not to the pirates, but to the underwriting instruments they hide behind. Show the rates. Show the risks. Make the insurers stare at themselves. Powerline, if you can't fight their guns, fight their spreadsheets." We sent the request across bands that carry weddings and funerals and the price of wheat. The debt fleet slowed by a fraction that meant interest had just learned it had a face. Their lead ship, burnished and disdainful, transmitted a refusal so polite it begged a judge to bark. "Declined," the captain said, standing by to enforce private remedies. "Artifact," I said, "mirror, phase 2. "Phase 2 requires gallery," the voice said, as if asking for the choir it loved. The ring lit. Every beacon in the corridor flared like a path to a lighthouse that grew from itself. The saint ship projected the first of the debt instruments onto the curve where no one could pretend not to see. Names scrolled. Amounts. Clauses the saying of profit from organized hunger. An old, ugly syntax glared under the kind, light if seized, then siphon, if bled, then bonus. Yarrow from the exchange transmitted a swift cipher. "Do you intend to collapse their market? Only the part that feeds on maiming." Hale replied, "Stand back if you want clean hands." Civilians watched their better secrets laid out like laundry under sunlight. The ash monks had nothing to chant against numbers that could be done on a child's slate. Sten Var tried to pivot to rage and found no purchase because rage is slippery when everyone sees its invoice. The debt fleet hesitated. Hesitation throbs. It makes predators blink and pray, remember spine. Our corridor pulsed the heartbeat again. 1, 2. Pause. I thought of the boy with the ribbon. I thought of my grandmother's bedtime laws. I thought of ledgers that might survive us. More faithful than any statue. Powerline sunlight is not a weapon, it's a budget. A voice entered our bands, new and steady. "This is Captain Leo Arendt of the guarantor vessel Merciful Claws," he said, possibly hating his own ship's name. "We acknowledge publication. We request a stay to audit our exposure." "Granted," I said immediately. "Within counts." Sten Var howled in a private channel, and we let his grief try to bruise us and found it made us stronger. The debt fleet drifted into a holding pattern while accountants did the real combat behind closed lids. The corridor kept beating. The miners worked. The teachers taught. The ash monks tore down their angry banners and used the cloth to wrap hot bread. Our tender ran hot, but held. Tamsin's arm itched where the shards were learning her as a home and deciding maybe to leave. Ortega learned the saint ship's moods as a musician learns a great instrument. The way you listen for the swell before it happens. Hale laughed rarely and slept little, the smile lines deepening into something permanent. Dika half built a new beacon by hand to prove to herself that hands still mattered. We gathered in the chamber for another round of teaching, because every victory breeds a test. I held the slate, and the room felt like a cathedral that wanted black coffee instead of incense. Today, I said, and my voice carried back to me kinder, we teach the difference between harm and discomfort. We will buffer the latter with patience. We will not rename the former. The Saint ship glowed along its edges, old and soft and inexorable. Powerline justice is not pain with better grammar. Outside, stars moved according to debts older than ours, and a ruin sang the low note of continuity. The ledger on the wall blinked once, as if acknowledging that a new entry waited its turn. I closed my eyes a moment and saw the corridor's light as a thread through a dark room where a child's hand could find it without asking. My grandmother's voice came back with the smell of her workshop cedar dust. Oil. Biscuits left too long in the oven. She told me that law was a fence you build so your neighbor's kid doesn't wander into the river. Not a prison. A kindness. I opened my eyes and saw the fence we'd made glow along the ring like a horizon. Commander, Hale said quietly, the guarantor wants to meet under truce. They propose a market fix that repudiates the worst instruments and binds the remainder to our corridor. It's messy. It's real. Set the table. I said, make it public. In the chamber's light, we pulled up chairs like a kitchen on the first day after a long winter. The Saint ship lowered a panel and, for the first time since we woke it, showed a physical sign as if to bless our mess, a small sigil etched into the amber, a circle intersected by a vertical tally, faint glow running down it like the last drop of a candle. I reached out, fingers hovering just shy of the ancient mark. If I touched it, I would feel nothing and everything. Numbers, names, paths we could last long enough to make real. The sigil warmed as if it had waited for skin. The sigil's line felt like a quiet road under my glove. We laid out cups and language, and Captain Leo Arendt arrived with a small team of suits who smelled like pressed linen and hot ship air. They stood at the edge of the dais as if the Saint ship were a cliff you respected, even when the drop thrilled you. We're not here to sanctify piracy. Arendt said, careful, but not brittle. We're here because our tables show catastrophic exposure if your mirror keeps forcing instruments to eat their own blades. Then blunt your blades, Hale said, jury publicly. A woman beside Arendt with an accountant's shoulders and a singer's breath slid a tablet onto the light plane. We propose a corridor rider. Tie all enforcement to published corridor metrics, heat budgets, vector windows, restitution steps. We retire instruments that reward seizure and replace them with clauses that pay on compliance. Dika frowned. You'll pay pirates to behave. We'll pay carriers for staying inside the fence. The woman said, if they hire wolves, they lose the stipend. Tamsin leaned over the table, visor up, scarred arm bare. Show the rates. They did. The math was plain and almost beautiful, a schedule that made good behavior cheaper than clever harm, with penalties that mirrored damage without tasting like revenge. The Saint ship's light warmed the table like it approved the rhythm. Power line, if you want peace to win, make it affordable at scale. We broadcast the proposal on open bands and invited miners, ferry pilots, and dock sweepers to annotate. We asked for insults. We got suggestions. Menno added a clause for emergency grace when storms threw small hulls off the lane by a degree no engine could correct. A Harrow operator argued for a fuel buffer when a family ship chose safe throttle over perfect timing. Hale rewrote indemnities until they no longer ate the poor first. Stenvar didn't posture. He cut. His third corvette slid under the ring's limb and lobbed a kinetic bead the size of a fist at Beacon 8, a small stone, a large consequence. The bead rode a vector that kissed the threshold where mirror enforcement would be ambiguous. He wanted us to overreach. We didn't. Tamsin sent a decoy balloon, just a foil bubble with a tiny charge that drifted into the bead's path and nudged it 2 centimeters off the line. The bead clipped itself on our definition and returned to sender with the exact energy it tried to gift us. Minus corridor safety margin. Sten's gun spat sparks, not bones. Power line, draw your lines, so small cruelties trip over them. Civilians watching from the dock exhaled as one, a sound like tide on gravel. A baker whispered that she'd bake a bread, shaped like a track with a heartbeat through it. A group of teens in patched vac suits cheered the decoy balloon like it had scored a goal. Ahrent did not clap. He adjusted a column on his tablet and hummed approval under his breath. Good fences, he said. Now, enforcement costs. We can fund corridor maintenance through a fraction of retired instrument premiums, but we'll need public audits to satisfy our boards. You'll get them, I said, monthly. Posted where children can count along. We set the signing for the next ring morning. More ceremony than necessity. Ceremony teaches. We cleaned the chamber with rags that smelled like citrus solvent and Old Hope. Ortega tuned radiant fins until the tender's heat sigh moderated to a purr. Menno chalked a miniature ledger on the wall for a class of stragglers, sleepy kids with scabbed knees. A grandmother who took notes on paper because pens are proof you lived. The night before the signing, the Ash monks left a gift on the dock, a small box of char ink, and a neat note. We refuse to legitimize awakenings, but we will not sabotage a fence that keeps children in from the dark. The box held brushes that made strokes like river reeds. Even their fear could be made useful. Power line. Not every opponent is your enemy. Some are your critics with good hands. We slept in shifts. Hale sat cross-legged beside the dais and read cases aloud to himself until his voice went to sand, then slept with his back against an ancient rib like a pilgrim who'd found a pew. Deka walked the line of tetherpins twice, then a third time because habit keeps more people alive than bravery. Tamsin muttered in her dreams about vectors like they were nursery rhymes. I dreamed of ledgers where numbers turned into paths a child could follow to school. Dawn in space is an agreement, not a gradient. We made one. The beacons pulsed in unison like faraway drums. The dock lights softened. The Saint ship exhaled warmth along the ambered seams. We called the meeting to order and left the door open, because a closed door rots trust from the hinges. Arendt signed first with a stylus that clicked like a tooth against glass. Yarrow from the exchange signed second, her hand steady. I signed last for Commonwealth stewardship, then stepped back so Deka and Menno could lift the pen that mattered. Deka's handwriting looked like a cliff, Menno's like a ladder. We were 3 strokes into applause when the ring shuddered, not an attack. A time. Something old woke up in a different room and coughed dust into the long air. Ortega's eyes went distant as if listening to a lover in another apartment. Array 5, they said, voice tight. Cooling systems 30% out of tolerance. It's been coasting since before we arrived. The Saint ship is keeping it inside safe. But if we load the mirror with a sudden event, heat cascade. I finished. The taste of copper back in my mouth. Ahrent's team looked up together, heads tilting with practiced fear. If your mirror fails during enforcement and cooks a corridor, The singer accountant said. Our boards will use our signatures to hang us. Then we keep the mirror inside budget, I said. Or we teach a way around. Power line. When the system strains, you don't shout. You change the exercise. Sten Var chose that moment to press his luck. 2 corvettes and a debt collector sloop inched into positions that let them graze the corridor with targeting beams that could be called navigational error. Their intent was to trigger a flurry of minor mirrors that, together, would boil our margin dry. Tamsin breathed once. Twice, like a diver. We can't mirror all at once, she said. We need a ledger that staggers penalties across a window so heat spreads like rain, not steam. Teach it, I said. Artifact. New rule rolling mirror. Accept restitution across a weighted time slice by mass class. Accepted, the Saint ship said. Provide weights. We proposed a schedule on the fly. Big hulls pay slower. Small hulls return faster. Total work equal. Heat smooth. Hale did the legal geometry, while Yarrow shaped it into a clause investors could respect. Dacre grabbed a hand mic and explained it to the doc in language that tasted like bread, not chalk. Menno drew a new diagram. 2 kids colored the window with wax. Sten fired a nibble shot. The mirror noted it, reached for the new rule, and spread the return across a long breath. The corridor temperature needle twitched, then settled like a bird on a wire. The array's cooling fans thrummed as if grateful for manners. Powerline smart justice lands like rain you can stand under. Sten Var wasn't stupid. He was stubborn. He would keep testing boundary edges until he found one we forgot to sand. He angled his sloop into a shadowed segment where beacon light faltered and lobbed a dummy lifeboat toward the lane with a distress flag lit. It was a violation wrapped in virtue. If we ignored it, we were cruel. If we helped, he'd ram the helper. The dock went quiet. Even the ash monks, gathered at the back with their ink-stained fingers, leaned forward. I'll go, Tamsin said. You'll hold, I said. We don't bite bait with bones we need for breathing. Then who she asked. Frustration blooming like heat. The public, Menno said softly. We teach them to help without providing him an angle. He opened his class notebook and wrote, big enough for a crowd to read, How to Rescue Under Mirror and Wolf. He spoke into the bands like a father in a kitchen. Approach at Delta V, no greater than corridor safe. Keep your heat budget low. 2 tugs minimum. 4 grapples. Announce your vectors every 10 seconds. A harbor crew answered with a chorus of copy. Dika staged the rescue with hands like iron. The dock's gossip hounds narrated until a joke broke the tension, and people remembered that courage is best handled in small jokes. Sten nudged his sloop for the rame. The Saint ship drew a new line under his wheel, attempted harm under flag. Mirror penalty escalated by doctrine. His sloop lost a third of its thrust for an hour. The rescue completed with bruises, not funerals. Powerline courage is a skill. Teach it step by counted step. After, I stood a while by the dock's viewport. Outside, tiny maintenance bots moved along the ring's spine like insects with holy work. The air smelled faintly of machine oil and onion bread. A girl with hair like wire watched me with the frank focus only kids give. Does the ship like us? She asked. It likes our math, I said. Which is how it knows us. She nodded as if I had said something obvious and true. Then she gave me a scrap of foil folded into a shape that could have been a fish. For luck, she said, and ran off before I could thank her. The debt fleet sent an ultimatum wrapped in apology. Arendt relayed it with polite fury boiling under his vowels. They'll accept our corridor rider with one condition, he said. They want the saintship to restrict mirror application to within ring shadow only. No mirroring on their clean routes beyond. They want pockets of exception. Hale said, places where old habits can hide. Refuse nicely. Dacre said, or refuse loud. We'll refuse clearly, I said. Artifact. Is mirror restricted by geography